Blood tests were done there and then the results came back, and her haemoglobin was 29. Like the normal range is sort of, for a baby, they should have an HB of over 120.
Wow.
Basically termed incompatible with life. I said to the paediatric haematologist that we saw there, I've been reading about this thing called diamond black vein anemia, and I think she could be a fit for it. Obviously, I'm really scared. And she said, I think it's very unlikely. We can do a test for it, but it's unlikely to be that. And it was. He does know that he shared his blood with Vida. Sometimes he says he wants it back.
If they're arguing, give it back. Yeah. It's my blood.
It was all hands on deck, and we were in the hospital a lot. And she was under kind of quite close surveillance for 15 months after the transplant, and then rang the bell in June last year. Yeah.
How did that feel?
Yeah, the heart soared.
Hello and welcome back to Happy Mum, Happy Baby, the podcast. I've been recording this podcast now for over 8 years. We're going into the 9th year. And I love having an eclectic mix of different stories. Stories from people in the public eye, stories from people who have gone through something that a lot of us will never live through. But it's about having this mic in front of us and about being sat in front of each other in such a way that is so real. I think we're so busy in life, we don't get to just sit and chat in the way that you can in this podcast studio, in the way that you can listen when you're at home, when you're in your car, when you're out walking your dog or out walking your baby. There's something about audio that is so special. And being able to share incredible stories is such an honour. It's a massive part of why I love doing this podcast. A little while back, I spoke to author and journalist Mina Holland. She'd written a book and it was incredible, and I'd read that book and we just knew we needed her to be in this studio with us. Mina and her husband Freddie found out their baby Vida was seriously unwell 2 days before she turned just 12 weeks old. In the whirlwind that followed, their worlds shifted overnight. What happened next was nothing short of extraordinary. This episode is about fear and hope, heartbreak and resilience, and the remarkable strength that parents can summon when they have no other choice. This is my chat with Mina Holland.
I have to say it's so surreal to be sitting here opposite you.
Really?
Because I think in my first 2-3 years of motherhood, I probably saw more of you than any of my friends. I feel like we should be going, hello, Giovanna. A lot of the baby club watched.
I love this. And also because that's what it was for, that, you know,
Yeah.
for parents that couldn't get out, and obviously then COVID happened and then no
Yeah.
one could go anywhere, to kind of have that little bit of time with your baby at home without the stress of,
Yeah.
you know, having to go somewhere if you couldn't. So I love the fact that, you know, that has helped so many families.
Well, for me, there was, you know, the first year of having a baby, I self-imposed some isolation.
Yeah.
And so I was giving her something of the baby sensory classes I might otherwise have done through the baby club. And also we spent a lot of time in hospital. So
Yeah.
there was a lot of keeping her still. And yeah, there was, you know, baby bear. And you. Mostly baby bear.
Mostly baby. It's all about baby bear. Me and Nigel were just, you know, his co-stars.
Yeah.
When you were younger, did you ever look to the future and think, I'd love to be a mum?
100%. I never called it into question.
Really?
It was so clear for me that it wasn't really up for discussion. I made it very clear when I met my husband that it was something that we would be doing if we were to stay together. He's a bit younger than me. I was sort of by that point like ready to get going.
Really?
Yeah, as I say, I really wanted a house full of kids and dogs, and yeah, I was ready to realise that.
It's funny, isn't it? You kind of grow up going, I'm not going to do what my mum and dad did. I'm going to do things very, very differently. And actually what you want is that safe space that they create.
Well, yeah, exactly. But you kind of like drift towards it,
Yeah.
perhaps a bit unconsciously.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's interesting. Like I've got a lot of friends who have been a bit more ambivalent about having kids. Some of them have then gone on to or have decided not to. But there was never a kind of empirical weighing up. You know, it was very clear to me. And so I think then when I had my first baby and things didn't go as I'd imagined, there was a strong kind of reflex reaction of I didn't sign up for this. This isn't what I'd imagined. This isn't my dream. So yeah, it kind of comes back, I think, to like, you know, I fell from a greater height because in a way I had been so clear, and yeah.
You also don't expect something like that to happen. But talking about you and Freddie, when you decided to start trying or go, you know, was that a big moment in your life to kind of go, right, we're going on to this next chapter?
We'd agreed that as soon as we got married, it was all systems go.
Really?
Yeah. And I've actually never talked about this before, but I had in the past had a termination, and I'd felt, you know, there'd been a lot of guilt and some regret about that. And so I sort of felt like, you know, once the wedding had happened, I was ready to go. And then it did actually take a while.
Did it?
Yeah. And with every passing month that it didn't happen, you know, the stakes felt higher, and I was, you know, there was a huge amount of anxiety around conceiving Vida.
Especially when you look back and kind of go, I felt that pregnancy happened, so how comes it's not happening?
Effortlessly. Yeah, exactly. And I think there was an aspect of that just made me think, all right, I've blown it. Yeah, but, you know, we did. We're lucky, like, we were able to conceive. And
what was it like finding out?
Magical. I mean, I'd kind of got used to talking myself into being pregnant every month.
Really?
And, you know, scouring Mumsnet, the forums.
All the symptoms.
Yeah, like, you know, seeing if, trying to work out if the blood was implantation bleeding or if it was just my period coming. You know, all of that. And so, in a way, you know, obviously I hoped that month I'd get a positive, but I'd learnt over the previous 6-7 months not to expect to get the result I wanted, but I did. And we were in Cornwall, staying with some of Freddie's family, and that morning we got up really early that morning to go kayaking on the Camel River, and it was just the most beautiful early summer light, and quite a magical thing to do, having just got the positive test that I'd been dreaming of. Yeah.
How was your pregnancy?
I would say it followed quite a typical trajectory. First 14-ish weeks, I remember being like having morning sickness, but never very vommy. I was just, you know, a bit sick and ate a lot of crackers and grapefruit.
But being the foodie that you are, was that a bit like, oh, crackers? Do you know what I mean? You love your food. You talk about food. So was it that thing of suddenly you can't eat certain things?
Yeah.
You're drawn to crackers?
Yeah, I was definitely never a pregnant person who didn't feel like eating the things that I loved, that I wasn't allowed.
Right, okay.
I always wanted a drink. I always wanted the washed rind cheese. But no, I mean, I think when you're feeling that sick, you're just sort of responding to what your body needs. You're just getting through it, aren't you? It's sort of managing. It's managing the sickness, and also being hungry makes it worse, I found. So it's kind of just like making sure that you're never hungry, but obviously you don't want to eat too much. It's sort of a balancing act.
And was that until 14 weeks, did you say?
Yeah, 14 weeks both times. It was, almost to the day. And then the second trimester was like, you know, a bit of a breeze. I really enjoyed it, felt quite energized. And then the third trimester, both times, second time was worse actually, horrific sciatica. Just hobbled around. And with Vida, with the first pregnancy, it was in, I can't remember, it was a 32-week scan. I got, a dodgy result, basically. And no one to this day can really tell us what reason there was for it. It probably is linked to the diagnosis she later got, but nobody really knows why. And I think that's because we're dealing with something very rare.
What was that dodgy?
So it was, you know, when you have an ultrasound, you they look at Dopplers, so the blood flow between the baby, between the placenta and the baby. The umbilical pulsatility index was very, very, very high, like off. You know, they sort of print a scale, like a graph, and mine was like off the chart.
Right.
So they said, come back and have another one in a couple of weeks. Went back and they were like, oh, it's fine now. You're kind of discharged. But they said, if you want to have another scan, come back and we'll do it. So, and I did. There was just a sort of
There's always
niggle.
that thing of if you want to, well, it's kind of like, well...
Why would I say no?
Yeah.
But also, it's so thrilling, particularly with your first baby, to just see your baby on the screen, isn't it? It's wonderful. So I took that, hoping, of course, for the best. I don't think I was overly anxious about it, unlike Freddie, who until she arrived was just, on the edge of his seat.
That's interesting as well, isn't it? Especially if you've not had anything happen to that point to kind of make you worried. I know that there's one thing off the chart, but sometimes those can be moments. And if you've had one after that's fine, kind of like, whew, take a breath. But actually for Freddie, that wasn't the case.
No, but I think that taps into the life experience he'd had, and also his character, which I can go into later. But I think I felt very reassured, but I did just want to go and have this next scan. So that happened. I think it was the day before I reached term, so 36 plus 6. Went in and it was, again, off the chart, high again. So they said, come in tomorrow, we're going to induce you, 37 weeks, which we did. And it was my first taste of how in hospitals there is absolutely no observance of any kind of routine circadian rhythms. They started my induction at 3:00 in the morning.
Wow.
With a pessary, and did that for a few days, and just nothing. My body didn't respond, didn't want to go into labour. She wasn't ready to come out, and so we were there for 5 days, and eventually they recommended a cesarean. And I really
nothing in those 5 days at all.
Nada. No,
she really wasn't ready.
No, she really wasn't, and she was very little, and only 37 weeks as well. So I mean, I guess it was cosy in there, but they recommended a cesarean. I had this idea of the birth I wanted, and it's kind of a bit like the idea I had of the home I would create. I saw myself as some kind of earth mother. I think I'd done the hypnobirthing, brought the clary sage to hospital, wasn't allowed to burn it on the ward.
You've got to get the oil, just the oil. That's the way forward.
Yeah, next time. I don't think there will be one. And anyway, so yeah, I really didn't want a cesarean. But I have to say, I am such an advocate of them. I've had 2 now, and they've both been very positive.
Was it hard dealing with that shift of kind of going or 5 days in where you were just a bit like,
I was ready.
Yeah,
really? We were knackered as well, and that actually did make it particularly difficult because we'd been awake all night for 5 days, because they were administering the meds at 3 a.m. So we were really, really tired and ready for the baby to arrive by that point. We were psyched up. And so, she was born by cesarean, and it was, wonderful. And actually feeding established very quickly. That side of things was quite easy.
How was a cesarean? Because obviously if you're not in your head thinking that that's the route you're going to go down, then all of a sudden you are. That's a lot of things happening that you've not even considered, or had you thought about it in terms of like being in a theatre ward, being on a theatre ward and having all those people and, I think it comes back. I was just ready by that point, and I'd been in an NCT group with, and Vida was the last baby in our NCT group to be born, and so they'd been the kind of precedents, and some of them had elective ones, some of them had to have cesareans, and so I was I knew that was a possible outcome. By that point, I think I probably had got over this desire to push, because by that I was so tired. Yeah. So it was all right, actually. And of course, it's very painful recovering from that surgery. But there were a lot of hands on deck, and we are lucky both of us were brought up in London. So we had both sets of grannies on hand. Yeah. What was it like meeting Vida for the first time?
Just, there's nothing else like it, is there? Unreal. We were just mesmerised by her. She was so elfin. She had this amazing head of hair from day one that was sort of quiff-like. It was like Tintin. And it was funny because I remember being pregnant, and obviously you sort of wonder how your baby's going to look. But then she arrived, and she was just so herself from the word go. Yeah. And she couldn't have been, looked any other way, been any other. She was so much herself from that first day, and I really see that in pictures now when I look back. And I remember the first night, again, I say we hadn't slept for those 5 days, but the first night she wouldn't let us put her down, and we didn't want to go to sleep. We were just sort of mesmerised.
There's a very weird thing, isn't it, when you're in hospital and they say and you're meant to sleep, but your baby's there. You're like, but if I fall asleep and my baby's, it's a very weird thing to close your eyes when the most precious thing in the world is next to you.
Yeah,
in exactly. a strange space.
Yeah, but I just produced this creature from my body. Like it felt so miraculous.
Yeah.
That why would I have slept on that first night? But it did make the second night really painful when Freddie went back home to get some much needed rest, and at that point I needed to get some sleep, and there was the sort of sleepy baby from the night before was no longer. She was like awake and hungry, and I remember, again, it's all the stuff that you think you're not going to do. I remember just going online and buying all the plastic, the dummies, the you and the sheep, like everything, all the stuff, all the swaddles with the Velcro.
At what point did you leave hospital?
After 2 nights there, so they let us go home. I think they'd been a bit concerned about, linked to those Dopplers.
Yeah.
Also, she was born with a little, what they call a PFO. It's a little hole in the heart, which is very common.
Yeah.
But they'd said you're going to need to come back in 6 weeks and just have a follow-up.
Often do those just resolve on their own?
And they do, yeah, I think so. And in fact, hers has. Mm-hmm. So they allowed us to go home, and getting back to our flat after basically a week in hospital was a really wonderful moment. As a family of 3.
At that point, because she's with you, are you worried about any of the readings or anything, or because
no, she's arrived and she looked perfect. She was little, but not that small. She was born at 37 plus 4, and she weighed 6.5 pounds.
It's
fine.
Yeah.
So no, and she the feeding did establish quite well, and so we felt quite good about that. And then the first couple of weeks were exhausting but good. Sat up holding her all night because she didn't like being put down. So
she also fed for a short amount of time.
Well, that happened later.
Oh, did it?
Yeah. So the feeding was going quite well, but I think it was, in a way, I would recommend people do antenatal classes. Not necessarily because of what they quote unquote teach you, but for the community, because even though comparison became a problem for me, it was quite instructive, like seeing how people in my group were establishing routines and the opposite was happening for us. Like the feeding was going downhill. She became quite quickly a really unhappy baby. Just cried and cried and cried and didn't sleep for very long. Was very difficult to get down to sleep because she was hungry.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't know physiologically what happens to an anemic child when they don't fit. I mean, she was starving but not hungry and not able to feed for whatever reason.
Without the energy, I guess, to feed.
Yeah, I guess.
At what point did you think that something was wrong or what was going on, or did you have to go back anyway for that routine appointment?
So that happened actually not at 6 weeks but 9 weeks. Just the system being slow. I didn't know that something was wrong with her. I just felt like it more and more it felt like it was me and that I wasn't made for this.
Yeah, so many people will relate to that.
Yeah, and I don't want to call it gaslighting because there was nothing malign or malicious in people's reassurance because that comes from a very kind place. It also comes from a place where there are lots of fussy babies. There are lots of babies that struggle to feed, and there are lots of anxious mothers. And so I was sort of surrounded by this very warm culture of reassurance that was, on the one hand, lovely, but just really, in my case, misplaced.
Yeah.
So we saw, again, threw money at the problem, lactation consultants. We went and she went to the tongue tie clinic.
Yeah.
Explored all the different possibilities. But time and time again, we were just told, she's fussy, she's got colic, witching hour, all, babies are so hard to explain.
Yeah.
And there would be moments where I would sort of, not even like consciously think something, but something would strike me. So, for example, giving her a bath at night. This is before we went back to have the hole in the heart looked at. So probably she's 6 weeks old or so. I remember having her in a little white baby bath and washing her and seeing my hand against her body and thinking, God, I look old. Like my hands are so wrinkly and gnarled and red and gross. And actually, they looked that particularly old and gross because her body was so white, because there was so little blood in her. And I look back at the pictures now of that time, and there was really, like, she's almost grey. Like there's no hemoglobin.
But also, as a mum, you don't know that.
No,
you don't know what you're looking out for. You don't know what you're doing anyway. So to be in that situation, totally. it's impossible to kind of go, well, that's not what.
But also
should look like.
With blood stuff, they actually come and do the heel prick test when they're a few days old. So in my mind, she'd been tested for blood disorders. And as you say, you don't know to look for it. But also, she was in decline from the moment she was detached from me. Mm-hmm. And it was slow, it was gradual. And I was with her all the time. Yeah. So it was a draining away. And it wasn't like, if I'd seen her when she was born and then seen her 12 weeks later, like before she had her first blood transfusion, yes, that would have probably been much more alarming than this kind of ebbing away of blood cells and well-being and health.
What happened at that first appointment?
So we went in to have the checkup. By this point, we had actually moved. Well, we were spending a lot of time at Freddie's mum's house in North London. Like, I was just finding being away from him, just being on my own with the baby all day, who just cried and cried and cried and didn't feed, really oppressive and difficult. And I just dreaded Freddie going to work. I dreaded Freddie going to work from the moment he got home from work every day. Yeah. And so at that time, he worked very close to his mum's house. So we moved in with her, and she's a therapist, so she was able to kind of check in with me every hour between patients. So we were up there, and it was, by this point, just so hard. I wasn't sleeping. She wasn't sleeping. I knew from taking her for weigh-ins that she wasn't putting on weight. And I could feel like, you just sort of have a sensory memory of how your baby... I just could tell she wasn't gaining weight and she wasn't thriving. But I didn't know anything was seriously wrong.
Did the health visitor say anything about
No, I think there's a health visitor had stopped coming. I think, I actually can't remember when they...
I think it is quite early.
Yeah, no. So, no. And she'd had her 6-week check at 9 weeks. And I think the GP had been a trainee and had just said, she looks fine, you seem fine, your wound is healing fine. My best friend came with me to that appointment and took photos of the baby, and she was so pale, so anemic. So anyway, at nearly 12 weeks, we went into our local hospital in South London for the follow-up, and the paediatrician just sort of looked at her and just said, "How do you think she's doing?" And by this point, we've been doing this for nearly 3 months, and we're so on our knees. But we've also learned that having a baby is just really hard, and we weren't prepared for it. So we were just kind of cheerleading ourselves, like, it's good. Like, we're getting the hang of it. And she just cut across us and said, "She's very anemic, and we're going to have to admit her today. She's going to need a blood transfusion." And that this was based not on seeing any blood results. This was just on how she looked. Blood tests were done there and then the results came back, and her hemoglobin was 29, which is the normal range is sort of, for a baby, they should have an HB of over 120. So it was basically termed incompatible with life. And that was the beginning. And we stayed back at our local hospital for another 5 days, and they gave her a blood transfusion over that period of time, like tiny amounts. And even after the first little bit of blood, which, didn't bring her hemoglobin up by much, but enough to make her feel a difference, she latched on. And I was just like, oh. And then that night in hospital, Freddie and I are top and tailing in a camp bed, like not really ideal conditions for a good night's sleep, but we slept really well, partly because Vida slept through the, well, she woke up once for a fee, but also I think there's something about just having experts around you that was very reassuring, felt very held, and actually that perpetuated. I having really sort of resented being in hospital for so long during the induction, I've now got to a place 6.5 years on where I'm very comfortable in medical spaces, and I feel very reassured to be surrounded by medics and nurses. And
such a personal thing, isn't it? Because I know some people hate them, but other people have a really positive, reaction towards them. One thing that you say in the book is you talk about the doctor saying to you, I'm going to paraphrase, but it's something along the lines of, how didn't you see?
Yeah.
Or why didn't you see? Or couldn't you see?
Yeah, awful.
But that is, in terms of mother's guilt, in terms of all of that, like that is, you're a new mum who has gone to the doctor, who has done everything that you're meant to do, but to suddenly put it on you, that I found that really difficult to read. So I don't know how that would have felt for you to receive.
Yeah, we just felt really stupid and really guilty, and like, we had been turned away so many times that I don't know if we would have taken her in if we hadn't had an appointment that day. It was a dark moment, that. But as I say, so I think something in me did see like those moments in the bath, but it was so gradual, and I had gone to see experts, and nobody had pointed it out. And like people subsequently, people that I love, who were like very close to me, said, I did think she was a funny colour. And there's a part of me that thinks, well, why didn't you say? And then there's another part of me that just thinks I don't know how I would have received that. Yeah. And so it's difficult, isn't it? Like how appropriate is it to say certain things to new parents that sort of suggests that you're questioning their ability to take care of their child. And
it's really difficult. It's really, because how do you approach things like that without causing offence?
Exactly. The mother's guilt was real, and I did have some maternal intuition about things not really going as smoothly as my NCT friends, and feeding had started well for us, unlike for other people, and was going downhill. Their trajectories were going the opposite way. There was a real niggle for me there. But when you're surrounded by this din of reassurance, and so many people telling you it's normal.
Yeah. After that initial blood transfusion, what happened after that? Were you sent home, but more tests done?
We were sent home, and they gave us a discharge summary. I write about this in the book, and we got home for the weekend. And in my experience, whenever you desperately need to get hold of a hospital, it's the weekend, and you can't. We got home, and I started reading through the papers of what had been written on her discharge notes, and basically a nurse had pressed the wrong thing on a drop-down menu, and so they'd put, instead of putting that she was under the care of the paediatrics team, they'd put that she was under the care of the palliative team. And so obviously went into a huge spin about that. And I think that really changed the course of things for me. I went to a place with it of just blind fear, and I don't think I came back for a long time.
Really?
But yeah,
to have a whole weekend thinking that is the case.
Yeah, because they'd been testing us for a lot over that weekend. She'd had panels and panels of tests for various different viruses or causes, potential causes for neonatal anemia, and all of them had come back negative. They had said to us during those 5 days in hospital that they were confident it wasn't blood cancer, but the fact that they were testing for so many very serious things did leave me feeling quite worried. And then to see that she was under the care of the palliative team, I mean, it just blew my mind. But we'd been discharged under instruction to bring her back twice a week for blood tests.
Right.
To see, so they were like, we've topped her up with blood. We just have to see what she does with it now. And there's no lots. This is all rare stuff. But in babies that have become that anemic, for some of them, it's just a kind of transient anemia, and one blood transfusion will kind of set them on the path to good health.
Yeah.
And then there's another cohort who that's not the case for, and so they needed to see which camp Vida fell into. And
how was she after that initial?
Well, it was amazing. I was like, oh my God, this is what I've been missing. You know, we were sleeping better, she was feeding better, and we had a couple of weeks like that, but we were still taking her back to hospital every few days.
And what did those bloods show?
So there was one blood test that showed a bit of red cell production, but it was a complete anomaly and no one can explain why that happened. And then they just started dropping again. And as soon as the hemoglobin started to drop and consistently kept dropping, that was a bad sign. It showed that she probably wasn't able to make the red blood cells that we all need to stay alive.
So is our body continuously producing them?
All the time.
Right.
Millions a second. And yeah, it's amazing science that we are completely unaware of.
Yeah.
But I can talk about the diagnosis she went on to have, and it took what I now understand to be not very long to diagnose her, but it felt like forever. It was 7 weeks of knowing there was something gravely wrong, but not having a name for it. And in that time, I became very obsessed with Googling, with Dr. Google.
That's so hard, right? Because you want to inform yourself. You want to kind of have some sort of information so that you don't feel like you're just sitting in the dark. But at the same time, Google is a scary place to be that was going to feed you a lot of stuff that isn't relevant.
Yeah. I really took to the whole situation like a journalist, I think.
Really?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to arm myself with information, and a lot of it wasn't welcome. But I kind of... I somehow, for some reason, I found some reassurance in it. It felt like action.
Yeah.
And I fell upon this very rare diagnosis called diamond black fan anemia, which I think I still remember seeing it for the first time, and it kind of like a diamond, stood, twinkled. It kind of stood out on the page and web page, and she was just an absolute, to the letter fit for, in terms of the timings of how things had played out, became symptomatic at 2 months. And then usually babies are diagnosed at 4 months. We were approaching 4 months when the diagnosis came through.
Did you take that to the doctors then as a possibility?
So from our local hospital, I pushed to be referred to the Evelina in St Thomas's. And I said to the paediatric haematologist that we saw there, I've been reading about this thing called diamond black fan anemia, and I think she could be a fit for it. Obviously, I'm really scared. And she said, I think it's very unlikely. We can do a test for it, but it's unlikely to be that. And it was, yeah. So.
What did it feel like to get that diagnosis? Because it's one thing kind of searching things and kind of trying to find an answer, but then knowing what you're faced with, that it's got to, there's no more guessing. We know exactly what it is. Is that a relief, or actually the reality of what you are then facing hits at the same time?
I was devastated by it, but I think by the time it had come through, I was pretty sure. I'd convinced myself. And so,
you know what I mean about relief? It's not that you're relieved that she's got it, but relieved to have an answer to it and then know what you can do.
Totally. There was a reason. And by that point, I think she'd had 2 or 3 blood transfusions. And I definitely hadn't got my head around taking my child to the hospital every 3 weeks to have a blood transfusion to stay alive. I hadn't accepted that, but I knew that was a likely outcome of what we were going through. And so And she'd also there'd been a blood test a couple of weeks before that had shown she had a very high protein that was kind of suggestive of the diagnosis we feared. So it had kind of added up to this point, and so the diagnosis came through at the beginning of the summer, and then that summer maternity leave, which before I'd left, I'd gone on leave from work. I'd imagined just frolicking around galleries and. Having lunchtime wine and stuff, sensory classes, real life ones. That summer just became this, a very dark time where I spent a lot of it behind closed doors, coming to terms with something that was, well, it felt pretty unimaginable before. So
what is diamond black fan anemia?
So it is an inherited. It's a genetically inherited blood disorder where the bone marrow doesn't produce any or enough red blood cells to stay alive. And you need red blood cells to carry oxygen around the body in the form of hemoglobin. And so patients like Vida need to have a blood transfusion every 3 or 4 weeks to stay alive.
And is that 3 or 4 weeks, is that measured by how quickly those blood cells go down?
Yeah, so they generally live for that long.
Mm-hmm.
And so we would give her a transfusion of donor blood, and it would bring her hemoglobin level up to the normal, or quite high normal count, and it would just gradually drop over the course of that period. We did every 3 weeks because she just wasn't thriving in the 4th. But yeah, as we neared transfusions, we would start to see glimpses of that very difficult,
really,
quote unquote, fussy, unhappy baby that we'd seen before. Just appetite sort of faded away and quite listless. Mood changes, quite unhappy.
At what point do you start talking about the future and, and Vida having a life that doesn't require her to have blood transfusions every 3 weeks?
For me, instantly. And I know that that's not necessarily typical. I think there are some parents facing this condition or similar ones who come to terms with the blood transfusion life. For me, it felt much easier to tackle the enormity of genetically engineering a sibling child and Vida having a bone marrow transplant than it did to just go through the motions of getting her the blood she needed every week. Every 3 weeks.
Is that also because I can sense that you're a doer and you're pragmatic and you like to have some, not control, but feel like you are actively doing rather than sitting back and waiting for other people to do?
Absolutely. And I think for my own, I realised, and everyone was telling me this, in order for her to be okay, you need to be okay.
How easy is that though?
It's not. It's quite, like lots of these platitudinous things, it's quite difficult. It's like, how do I act on that? I'm not okay. This is really hard. But for me to be okay in that, it felt helpful for me to have a project, to have a goal, and that became it. So I had, in all my reading, breastfeeding in the middle of the night by the light of my phone, I'd understood that diamond black fan anemia can be treated in one of 3 ways. Blood transfusions, which come with quite a lot of complications. Mm-hmm. Some kids respond to steroids, which sort of jolt the bone marrow to produce red cells. We did a trial for that. It didn't work. Mm-hmm. Or a bone marrow transplant. And then there was this kind of dangling carrot in the future of gene therapy, but it felt very far away.
Yeah. And
so I started looking into bone marrow transplant, and it's a risky procedure, and it's at least a year out of mainstream life, and it's an endurance for the whole family.
Is that because she has to be isolated throughout a large chunk of it as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Quite intense, very intense chemotherapy to kill off the whole immune system, and then donor stem cells are put in, and then the recipient's immune system is kind of suppressed for a long time, and gradually immunosuppressant medication is sort of weaned, but it takes a very long time. And so I looked into that, and I understood from my reading that there's a bone marrow register, and that there would be a good chance of her finding an unrelated donor, but the gold standard is to have a sibling. And so then we started on this path of like, do we have we know we want another child. We've always wanted, a bigger family. Do we go about that the natural way? There's a 1 in 4 chance of it happening. Or do we try and give ourselves the best chances, or her the best chance of having an ideal donor, and do IVF? So we started looking into that. And
you talk a lot about that in the book, about your almost conflicting views on it, or the idea that you are not designing your baby in a way of having blonde hair, blue eyes, or, being a girl or a boy, but actually looking at the genetics of a baby to kind of go, are he or she a match? For a bone marrow transplant. Yeah.
I mean, I don't think anyone can really have an opinion on this until they're faced, until they have a child.
But it's also that thing, isn't it, of in the media, all we're ever talked about in terms of this is someone who's selecting a gender. That's the only way that we're ever presented the idea of looking at those cells and seeing what's going on.
Yeah. But I think for medical purposes, like our very rare situation, how fucking wonderful that this is possible. It actually wasn't possible for us. It didn't work.
But it did blow my mind that you thought it was, that you felt like it was a something that was divisive in this case. You know what I mean? And, I have no opinion on anyone doing it for anything. But for the fact that you felt that there would be a response to the fact that you'd gone down that route blew my mind. Because until you have a baby that is that sick, how can someone possibly have an opinion on what you're going through?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know whether I should mention this, but we had, when the book came out, a publication that I shall remain nameless ran an extract of it with the headline, "We had another baby to..." I actually can't remember verbatim what the headline was, but insinuating, basically, not even insinuating, saying that we had our second child to save our first. And that is categorically not the case. We knew we wanted a second child. We knew we wanted a sibling for Vida. But we just thought, if there's a chance that this baby could help his sister in the future, their sister in the future, then why would we not do that? Yeah. And in the end, I didn't even go through fully with the whole procedure. I just wasn't responding to the IVF meds. Didn't realise that was a thing.
Again, you don't know until you go through these things.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, so your body just didn't react to the...
Just wasn't, the hormones weren't coming up. They gave me boosts of, what do they call it, Clomid. They were really, really trying to get more follicles, and there were only 3 or 4 there. And then added to that we then needed to make embryos that were a stem cell match for Vida. There was a 1 in 4 chance of that working. And then you have all the crazy odds of IVF anyway. Only 1 in 4 of those transfers work. We were looking at spending tens of thousands of pounds, not covered on the NHS, for something that was unlikely to work. Yeah. But by that point, I was just so psyched up for having another child. And I felt like, again, that in itself was a kind of a project. And I just said, like, let's go about it the old-fashioned way.
Was it difficult saying goodbye to the IVF route, or did it? Because obviously, in that way, there's an element of control. But actually, by just going the old-fashioned way, you are leaning into we're having a baby. You know what I mean? Rather than all the other things that comes along with the IVF route.
I was relieved actually in the end when I got a clear steer on it. Yeah. The clinic we were working with really levelled with me. And I'd already spent a fortune with them, but they could have encouraged us to go ahead and spend loads more. And actually, they just said the chances of you've been through a lot, and the chances of this ending in your desired result are quite slim. And I just remember leaving the clinic that day and going and buying a triple shot coffee, which I hadn't had caffeine for weeks, and just thinking, okay, we're just going to have to, go about things differently, the way we know how. Yeah. And so I did actually get pregnant again quite quickly. And that second pregnancy was a trip because we found out I was pregnant, I think, like a few days after the first lockdown was announced. And Freddie wasn't able to come to loads of the appointments,
Really?
which
Yeah,
I think
of course.
actually spared him a bit. I think he was just, he'd been very traumatised by what we'd just gone through.
That's got to be hard. It's that thing, isn't it? It's not even what Vida's going through. It's how it's affecting you. It's how it's affecting Freddie. It's how it's affecting your relationship, you as a family. Like there's so many people react to things in very different ways. But doing that and sticking together, that's got to be a challenge in its own.
Yeah, we went on very different paths with it. I think it's interesting. Freddie hadn't had such a smooth ride as me in a way. Like both my parents together, they were healthy, and the only people I'd lost to be my grandparents. That was not the case for Freddie. He lost his dad when he was quite young, and he said to me quite poignantly during that very hard summer. I think I said to him, well, no, I remember him saying at some point that summer, I thought I paid my dues. I thought I was safe.
Yeah.
And I had just assumed I was safe. And I very much, he was quite pragmatic and just went, he's very much like, breaking down a problem, one foot in front of the other. Let's just make sure we've got the hang of the transfusions. And as I said before, like I needed to have the grand project. I spiraled and found it very, very difficult to accept. Also because when she was full of blood, she was just a gurgly, happy baby. And it
almost
just
doesn't
seemed,
marry with
No.
what is going on the inside.
Absolutely not. And yeah, she looked, quote unquote, normal. Not all disabilities are visible.
Yeah.
And so I kind of disbelieved. I went through phases of disbelieving the diagnosis, thinking they got it wrong. It was kind of crazy making. And I went to see lots of therapists in that time, but one in particular, who I still see to this day, said to me, we suffer alone and we heal in relationship. And that doesn't mean in a relationship, not necessarily a romantic one, but I think what she meant by that was you are always going to suffer if you're isolated, and it's in finding community that we can heal. And that was certainly the case for me. And I think that I didn't realise until I'd finished the book, until a long time after I'd finished it, that so much of it is about finding community.
Yeah.
Even though I spent so much time alone. And there is nothing that makes you feel like a part of a community in the way that being reliant on blood donors on behalf of your child does. I think I was just very inarticulate, but yeah.
But even in that, it's Vida's got such a rare blood disorder that how do you find those fellow parents? That's got to be such a small community of people. So finding people that can relate exactly to what you're going through or have their own experience that you can gather some sort of hope from, must be really, really.
It would, yeah. And there's a Facebook group for the charity for her condition.
You said you kind of watched.
Oh, yeah, I was very sort of voyeuristic at first.
Yeah.
And I felt quite horrified by some of the things people shared because I was scared.
Yeah.
And I really didn't want to engage with it because that felt like accepting something I just hadn't yet, and I wasn't ready to step into that role of carer.
Yeah.
I was already doing the caring, but it was up my identity, I suppose. It was like having to shift that. But eventually I did start engaging, and I've made friends through those groups, and they will be in my life forever. And I wouldn't have got through some of those dark times without having them to sort of bounce off.
It's like you said earlier, having those thoughts of this isn't what I signed up for. And actually part of what you then are signed up for is a huge part of it is acceptance before you can even process what's going on. You've got to accept it.
Exactly. Yeah. And that first year was a process of accepting. And just as I was ready to start emerging, COVID hit.
You'd gone back to work as well, hadn't you?
I'd just gone back to work.
What was it like finding out you were pregnant again?
I was so happy. I was so excited. Freddie, I think it's really hard for the partner because you're one step removed. Yeah. And I would be lying if I said it wasn't quite an anxious pregnancy. Not so much because of COVID for me. COVID was weirdly quite a positive experience for me because I felt no longer alone in this, fearing a potentially quite serious medical emergency. Yeah. It was a problem shared. Freddie was very worried about the virus and how that could affect. Well, as was I with Vida, but the pregnancy itself, I think I knew that the chances of this next baby having Vida's condition, which I should add, neither Freddie or I have, it was a spontaneous thing. I knew the chances were slim, but I think when you've been through something so rare, and you feel like anything could happen. Yeah.
You had a harmony test at 10 weeks.
We had a harmony test. Yeah. So we found out he was a boy, and it was all. I on the whole, it was a good pregnancy for me. I decided to have him at the hospital where Vida had her transfusions. I had. I think it's really important for people to remember that they can change consultant if they want to. They can request, change in the personnel that are looking after them in maternity wards. I actually didn't request this, but they gave me a midwife who specialised in maternal mental health because of my history with Vida, and I requested that I stayed with a fetal medicine consultant. So we did try and test Gabriel for DBA with amniocentesis and.
Well, you went to the appointment.
Went to the appointment, and then he just said, "You do know that you've got a higher risk of miscarriage from having an amniocentesis than the chances of this baby having DBA." And so, I got up and left.
Again, though, it's that thing of knowing that you can change your mind.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's been a real learning curve, actually, like learning to advocate for myself and obviously for my child in medical settings. But it's been quite a sort of extraordinary introduction to parenthood, really. And when Gabriel was about 2 months old, we got a call saying that they'd got the results and he was a perfect match for her.
How did that feel? Because were you able to separate separate Gabriel from that possibility? Because obviously you're leaning into the fact that you're pregnant and it's amazing, you wanted more children, but there's also this added hope that comes alongside but it's an alongside thing.
It was an alongside thing. I never wanted him to feel any pressure, or I didn't want to put, well, not that he would as a baby, but I didn't want to put any pressure on him. There was a hope there. We thought wouldn't that be amazing, but there was never an assumption. And so when we found out, it was just, we were just overjoyed.
Really?
Yeah, it was wonderful. And I think it was at that stage that we felt pretty clear that this would be the road we were going to go down. I think he wasn't allowed to donate till he was 2, but we needed a couple of years as a couple to bring our outlooks, our approaches in line with one another's. Yeah. I think I'd always been quite quietly confident about thinking the transplant would be my personally preferred route, and taking my cue from the medics. I wouldn't have pushed for it if I felt that. Well, I wouldn't have wanted it if I'd felt like I was putting her at undue risk. But in the time between her being diagnosed and her having her transplant, there was lots of literature published about really good outcomes for transplant patients, and we had this kind of gold standard of a match. So
when it comes to the transplant actually happening, and you then have 2 children who are going through a procedure, that's got to, I know the aim is hope, the aim is an amazing outcome for all, but then were there moments where you kind of felt the weight of it?
Yeah, I did. I think on the morning of Gabriel's donation, there was a real heaviness to that day, knowing that we were going to be putting him through actually a very similar procedure to some that Vida had, like biopsies in her back. That's what they do is they put a needle into the back of the hip and extract stem cells that way. But putting him through that, not for any, life-saving or nothing to do with his own health.
Yeah.
There was a heaviness to that, but I also, we'd had to have counselling with a psychotherapist, clinical psychologist, beforehand to make sure that we were holding our children's needs in balance, and we had to write down why we felt it was important for Gabriel that Vida had the transplant. And so I think we were very on the same page, and we felt very confident that we were making the best decision for us as a family, not just for one child.
And reading about it, it seems like a bit of a blessing, really, that Gabriel was so young. Yeah. Because in older siblings, they
had the counselling.
Yeah,
exactly.
Whereas this thing has happened that he will not really, you'll obviously talk about it, but in a lot of ways, he won't be physically aware that anything has happened.
No, I don't think he really remembers. I think he remembers being given a dinosaur truck afterwards and that being pretty fucking cool. But I don't think there's a lot of memory there. He does know that he shared his blood with Vida. Sometimes he says he wants it back.
If they're arguing, give it back. Yeah. It's my blood.
Yeah.
So after Gabriel had made his donation, what did that look like then for Vida?
So she'd had a week of chemo before that, and then basically the cells were taken from Gabriel that morning. They were taken on a motorbike to be cleansed and loads of stuff to be done to them at another hospital, biked back to where we were, St Mary's, and then put into her like a blood transfusion. It was very familiar to her, the whole procedure. She wouldn't have known it to be any different from the treatment she'd been having for 4 years.
And at this point, she's 4.
She's 4.
So how aware is she of what's happening, or is she just not?
She's aware that she's living in one room for 6 weeks.
True.
and really wants to get out. She's aware that she's getting lots of presents. And it's taken quite a long time to sort of wean her off for her not to answer the front door and say, "Have you got a present for me?" So I think, you know what, there were really traumatic bits of it for her, namely when we tried to transition her to oral medication, because when you're in the kind of the height of the transplant, everything goes through a Hickman line, but in order to go home you need to take stuff through your mouth, and I mean that was carnage. And she actually she had to go home with an NG tube that we had training in. She was just very, very young to be taking that number of gross concoctions 4 times a day. But actually, I think there was a lot about it that was, you I guess maybe it's just hindsight, but I am able to see some positives to that time. She had a lot of one-on-one time with me and or Freddie.
Were you able to switch in and out?
We're really lucky. Our parents are in London, and actually Freddie's mum lives quite close to the hospital, so we would do a night on, night off each. And you have a kind of ante-room outside where the kind of sealed transplant room, and you kind of go and scrub down and get ultra clean before you can enter again. So we would, live like that for 6 weeks. And then I think there was a kind of, simplicity's not the right word, but it was quite a well-oiled machine that we had during that really acute phase. The really hard bit, I think Freddie would agree, was when we got home, and then we were really suddenly we felt quite exposed and in charge. Mm-hmm. There weren't nurses coming in every 3 hours to do her obs, and we had to keep a really close eye on temperatures. And any time a post-transplant patient has the hint of a fever, they're admitted for a few days. And I think that was really hard for Gabriel. One of us, usually me, would disappear for a few days with Vida. He was very young. So, it was a challenging
Did
period.
you have to go back routinely anyway to get, more blood tests done?
2 to 3 times a week we were driving into Paddington. Yeah. Yeah, so I basically took another maternity leave.
Did you?
Yeah. It was parental leave, but it sort of felt.
Well,
the same
how do you? You can't juggle the two. One is, one is it's more than a full-time responsibility.
Yeah, I couldn't have done. So it was it was all hands on deck, and we were in the hospital a lot, and she was under kind of quite close surveillance for 15 months after the transplant, and then rang the bell in June last year. Yeah.
How did that feel?
Yeah, the heart soared. It was amazing. It was amazing to be living this moment that I had been dreaming about from the moment that she'd received the diagnosis. Really, I hadn't been dreaming of the transplant, but dreaming of her ringing the bell and that proclaiming a transfusion-independent life, and this massive procedure having worked was unreal.
At that point, are you able to look back? And I know that writing the book would have really helped you look back at everything you've been through. But is there a moment where you stop and kind of go, whoa, like that? Did that all just really happen?
Yeah, I think it does take some distance from the whole thing for that to happen, and it happens, quite often actually.
Really?
Just the sense of reeling, like, I don't know. Sometimes I have to kind of stop because life, they're both at school now, and we're both working again, and sometimes I'll just have to remind myself what we've gone through, and to go slower, and to be what I have been fundamentally rewired by the whole thing, and sometimes life can feel like a lot, and because everyone is doing well now, there's kind of almost maybe it's the expectation is of myself, like just to get on with it, and I've got the outcome that I wanted. I wanted her to be transfusion independent and well, and so things are fine, right? But actually, we've gone through a lot of, trauma.
Yeah. So I think you might have been going through therapy whilst everything was happening, but surely that's got to be a continuation of things, of you continuing to allow yourself that time to just sit and reflect.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think writing the book really did that for me, and therapy, I think, will become more helpful over time when I've got a bit of critical, reflective distance from the whole thing.
Yep.
Writing the book was a really important exercise for me because I mean, it sounds a bit cliched, but I really did feel like this condition, our experience, this thing that had happened to us, was in control of me, and there was something about doing that turned the tables, and I sort of felt in command of my story. Mm-hmm. And
in the same way that you were looking for people that had a baby with this diagnosis and looking for the hope, that is also what this book is about.
Yeah,
it's that hope.
Yeah,
and I don't mean that it's just for people. I think it's an incredible look at your life at that time and what Vida's been through, and it is that human story, I think, that is so touching, and about a family really, and all the things in life that are important, but getting it down is a really incredible thing to do.
I definitely felt like I wanted to write the book that I hadn't been able to find for myself. I think the exercise of writing it felt like it was for me, but the fact that it is now out in the world, and I have had some messages from people who have found it helpful, or it's resonated with. It means so much, and I think there was no precedent. Like what happened felt like my worst fear, right? Like my baby being dangerously ill, and she could have died. And there was no precedent for how to manage that situation that I could find. And so it felt like there was a role for something that did that just recorded a mother's journey with it. Interestingly, the fact that there's a reason why those books don't really exist, and it's because publishers are quite apprehensive, because it is everyone's worst fear. They're not very commercial propositions. But so it was quite hard to sell. But I definitely am very happy it's out in the world and has a life beyond my life.
Do you feel like you're able to finally relax into motherhood now?
I mean, it's not relaxing. What are you talking about?
But just kind of go, look, this is just the everyday chaos of motherhood.
Yeah.
Like, are you able to, does the fear still sit with you, or are you able to just take a deep breath and just be in the moment?
I actually think I am able to be in the moment. Yeah, obviously, like, I do get glimmers of the fear. Like, there was a terrible moment in the summer when Gabriel got, like, some sort of helicopter toy hit him in the eye, and he was screaming that he couldn't see. He was fine. But, you know, that, like, chilling, and that was so avoidable. But, I mean, you could say that's not different from any parent. Like, that is a scary scenario.
Yeah.
But I do think that what I've been through has given me a very helpful perspective on things. Like, before, the only thing that I really had to worry about was my own anxiety. I had imposter syndrome, you know, insomnia issues, like just stuff that petty worries. And I'd be lying if I said that stuff didn't still come up for me now. But I do have a pretty massive experience that puts it into perspective, which I do feel grateful for. But yeah, no, motherhood's not relaxing. I did last night get into a real stress because I bought Vida really wants a Labubu.
Oh, I've heard all about the Labubus.
And I got one for her on Vinted, and I just became really obsessed with whether it was real or not. I went into a bit of a rabbit hole. But she doesn't care. She's not going to know.
Care.
No, I know. It's definitely fake.
The fact that it's called a Labubu makes it very...
Yeah. Well, ours is a Lafufu, and it was actually even...
I don't think this Lafufu is real.
No, that is the name for a fake.
Oh,
but I was like, well, maybe that's the name of one of the Labubus. It's just Lafufu. And then I'd written to the vendor saying, just how do I tell if it's real? And she never responded. So we got fake.
Lafufu. See, I call my fanny a foof. So... Lafufu. I'm now going to jazz it up a little bit.
Wow.
Lafufu. I think it's fair to say that motherhood hasn't been what you imagined it to be. But how are you feeling about you as a mother now?
I'm just really here for it. I feel like I am. It took a long time for me to comfortably wear the mum hat.
Yeah.
You know when you have your first baby and you're suddenly pushing a pram and you feel ridiculous? Like, I think it took a long time for it to sink in that was I was a mother.
Yeah.
I was a mum. And I feel like I have... it's almost like I've experienced motherhood intensified by going through all this medical stuff.
If you could write a letter on motherhood, who would it be to, and what would you say?
I've actually written down an answer to this.
Go for it.
Because I was going to dedicate it to my younger self, and then Freddie sort of suggested something else, and we had an argument about it, and then I realised I thought he was right. So...
I'm sorry, this has interfered with your marriage.
Yeah. I would write it to my younger self, but I think perhaps by proxy to expectant women who might be on the cusp of a very challenging start. Not many people level with mums to be about what to expect, and if they do, it's a bit questionable. You know, when people say, you know, you're going to be so tired and just you wait. Yeah. Bit douchey. So you're never really prepared for any version of motherhood, let alone one with complications. And I think that's why I'd have really appreciated this from my older self. I'd say that motherhood won't be what you expect, but that however it turns out, it will be your life's most important work. You won't always love it, but your love for them will carry you through those times. It's a love that is intense, steadfast, sometimes even terrifying, and unlike anything else you'll ever know. A love and a life that pushes you to new extremes and reveals a different dimension to yourself. On the hardest days, remember that how you're feeling will give way to something else. Things will shift, something different will come, and there is relief in remembering that. With or without medical complications, motherhood changes and intensifies your life irreversibly. With or without medical complications, it's so much richer for it.
Beautiful. How is Vida now?
She's great. She's thriving. She's in year 2. She's quite thespy. She's very creative. And she really lives up to her name. Yeah, she is a life force.
I love that. I love that so much. We end the podcast with you completing 3 sentences. The first one is being a mum means.
Being a mum means welcoming life in all its messy unpredictability. The highs and the lows and the bliss and the brokenness and the laughter and the tears, and loving your kids through it all.
Since having children, I
wear earplugs at night.
And I'm happy when?
I'm happy when we're all sitting around a table after a day, walking the dog, running around, and we're eating something I've cooked, and the kids instigate a cheers and our cups are full.
I love that so much. Mina, thank you so much for
Thanks
coming
for having me.
chatting. I've absolutely loved it. I've just loved listening to you share your story, and it is one of hope. So hearing that Vida's doing so well now is incredible.
Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure.